is here. Today is the final episode of Journey to Marvel's Phase 4 because I am ranking all three phases of the MCU. Welcome back to my channel, everybody. I'm Movie Micah. Go ahead and tell me your ranking of all three phases in the comments down below. And with that said, let's get started. In last place is Phase 2. This phase definitely feels like it took the most risks out of the phases, and that is its strong point. It took some really huge risks with the Guardians of the Galaxy and Ant-Man, and those totally paid off. However, there are also some risks that didn't work with the Mandarin twist in Iron Man 3. One thing that puts this phase below the others is that it was really divided by years. There are some obvious years where it was going well for Marvel, and some obvious years where it wasn't. In 2013, they made Iron Man 3 and Thor: The Dark World, which are not some of the most liked films in the MCU. Then in 2014, they made some really popular films with Guardians of the Galaxy and Captain America: The Winter Soldier. And then finally in 2015, they made two films that are kind of average, which are Avengers: Age of Ultron and Ant-Man. I completely appreciate everything that Phase 2 experimented with, but it is my least favorite phase for one reason. I feel like in Phase 1, they had a story that they were leading up to the whole time. For most of the phase, they were introducing characters, and they all led up to the Avengers where they came together. That feels like a complete story. However, in Phase 2, there isn't a complete story by itself. It is more of a setup phase, because even the conclusion to Phase 2, Age of Ultron, had too much things to set up that came later. That's why Phase 2 is in last place. My runner-up is Phase 1. I believe this phase is basically a perfect one to start out the MCU. I think it did everything good enough to kick off this universe. Yes, there are some very weak films like The Incredible Hulk and Iron Man 2, but all the others introduced the characters very, very well. Each origin story was crafted pretty well in my opinion. My favorite movie of this phase is The Avengers, but it only really works with all the movies that came before. The Avengers didn't have to focus so much on introducing the characters because they each already got their own origin stories done. This is the best thing about this phase. All the movies work really well together. While they had a tiny bit of trouble finding their footing in the beginning, Phase 1 kicked off the MCU very well, and these would still be some of my favorite films of all time if nothing else came after. A couple of these films I think are quite underappreciated. Thor and Captain America: The First Avenger are both movies that I think get too much criticism. Yes, they have their problems, but I actually prefer the first Avenger to Iron Man. I like this phase more than Phase 2 because it does have its own story by itself, but it also managed to set up the rest of the MCU so well. Something that Phase 2 is lacking is obviously a story of its own. Phase 1 did better than Phase 2 in my opinion, but both of them are fantastic. Comment below if you have Phase 1 or 2 in last place. I think we can all agree that neither of them are number 1 though. In first place is Phase 3. Easily number 1, without a doubt, is Phase 3. Of course it had an unfair advantage because it had nearly twice as many films as the other two, but that doesn't even matter because none of the Phase 3 movies are even close to being bad. My least favorite film of Phase 3 is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, and it's nowhere near bad. That is a giant accomplishment. This phase really built off the previous two phases so well. It relied on Phase 1 and 2 to introduce most of the characters, and this phase brought it all together so well. With that said, this phase also introduced a bunch of characters on its own, including Doctor Strange, Black Panther, and Spider-Man. Even though it relies on the other phases a little bit, it also feels like its own complete story. It starts with the heroes splitting up in Civil War, and then in the end they have to come together again to defeat the largest threat of all in Thanos. If you say that Phase 1 and 2 introduced characters super well and had their own fantastic conclusions, you would be right, but Phase 3 does all of that much better. It introduced more characters of its own, doubled down on enjoyment, and gave us a perfect conclusion to all the phases, not just its own. With most characters set up and developed in Phase 1 and 2, they could do incredible things in Phase 3 that not many studios have been able to do as well. Fan service. So in my opinion, Phase 1 is its own story, but it also set up Future so well. Phase 2 took some risks and they paid off, but it didn't really lead to anything of its own. And then Phase 3 did all the good things and did it so much better. The third phase of the MCU is an incredible achievement, and it will be the thing that makes the MCU legendary in the future. I don't have any doubt in my mind that Phase 3 is the best out of the 3 phases so far. And now, what do you think? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. How do you rank these phases, and what do you think each of them does for the MCU? This is just my ranking. Go ahead and tell me yours in the comments down below. So that's my ranking of all 3 MCU phases. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to click that like button and subscribe so you don't miss out on any more MCU rankings like this one. If you missed the rest of my phase, The Journey to Marvel's Phase 4, go ahead back to my channel, watch those videos where I go more in depth with each movie of each phase. Thanks for watching. This is Movie Micah signing off, but I'll see you next time.